Muted.
Hello and welcome to all of our viewers. My name is MK Smith.
And I'm Bassam Haddad.
And we are very happy to be your co-host for Season 3, Episode 2 of Live with ASI, A Month of Knowledge Production, covering the month of September. We have an excellent show today that we are pulling together via script right now.
Yes.
And
well, let's do the intro because...
Why not?
Yeah, let's do the intro. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, now we continue. Okay, so yes, we are covering the month of September, and now look at that, it's the intro. That's what you're supposed to do. Well, we have a great show ahead with the recent Landscapes of Insecurities conference, a panel on anti-government protests in Iran, several new books by the ASI team members, pedagogical content, new texts out now, and must-read recommendations.
We also have several engaging interviews lined up with Omar Dahi, Manije Moradian, and Catherine Sameh, Abdullah Al-Aryan, Lisa Hajjar, and Nadia Sbeiti.
Woohoo, it's a packed show.
Yep.
As always, you'll be able to find all of the content covered on today's episode in the episode digest, which will be published later this week.
So sit back, relax, and let's get to it.
In mid-September, ASI's partner, Security in Context, and the University of Oklahoma Center for Peace and Development held the inaugural Landscapes of Insecurities conference in Oklahoma City. The goal of the conference was to bring together like-minded individuals who are committed to social justice, bottom-up development, and cross-disciplinary work by creating a cross-regional exchange.
The conferences strove to strengthen the idea of a security in context network and allowed the participants to share their research, brainstorm, and create concrete research themes and projects. I myself attended this conference and it was an incredible experience actually, and here with us to say more about it is Omar Dahi, who will join us in just a minute.
Yes, so we are very fortunate to have Omar here with us today, who is the Security in Context Project Director, as well as a Professor of Economics at Hampshire College, and Jadaliya co-editor, to fill us in on the conference. Welcome, Omar. Good to see you.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So I know Bassem got to attend the conference. I didn't get to go, so I would love if you could fill me in on some of the motivations behind the conference, who was attending, what were the goals.
Sure. Yeah, I'm very happy that Bassam was able to come, and he was one of several people who really came from the U.S., but also outside the U.S., from South America and elsewhere in Europe as well, who really came together for our first in-person big meeting since the pandemic. So this was important for us on many levels. For that, which is really significant because a lot of the work of this project is really built around critical, sensitive issues of rethinking policies of security, rethinking militarism, policing, securitization from a comparative perspective. And a big part of our methodology is really to, we're a research initiative that has our own sort of agenda, but a big part of what we do is to collaborate with others who are in various locations in the US and outside the US to compare notes, to build on their expertise, and to really think about these issues from a comparative perspective. So the conference itself was in Oklahoma, which is really perhaps you can say an unusual location. We have collaborators on the East and West Coast, but part of the project's really vision is to engage with different audiences, is to engage with different centers. And our partners in Oklahoma were the Center for Peace and Development at the University of Oklahoma, who do a significant amount of work on peace and security in sub-Saharan Africa. So really the conference was a chance to connect, to build on the work that we've done so far, and also to think about sort of our plan for the next 2 years.
Yeah,
Okay, Sorry, we couldn't see ourselves, so we weren't sure if we were live. Thank you, Omar. That was very comprehensive. Now, from what you've shared and from what Bassam has shared with me as well, it sounds like a ton of content was covered over the course of the weekend. And I'm curious if you might share some of the most essential threads that permeated the entire conference.
And while you do that, Omar, if you can also, I mean, we don't want to rush you at all, but I last time at one point we forgot to ask about future plans. So please also, before we leave you, share with us what to expect with this project in the future.
Sure. So I'll tell you a little bit about some of the things we covered in the conference, and then I'll mention some of our really exciting future plans and ones that sort of indicate the kind of reason that why we have a network in this initiative. The conference itself highlighted several, like three main themes that were actually research tracks or research initiatives within the project. And the first one was a research track that we called Financialization and Militarism. This is a research track that is led by Dr. Shana Marshall. And she assembled a group of scholars, practitioners, researchers who work with NGOs, but also academics who are looking at the intersection of big finance and the military-industrial complex, which is really the intersection of sort of late capitalism in its most brutal forms, basically big finance and the fact that big financial firms are investing in military companies in the so-called defense sector, basically in war making, and military companies that have their own financial arms. And this type of mutual investments lead to all sorts of odd configurations. It leads to basically enabling factors that enable the expansion of military industrial complexes, not just in the US, but in part of the research group, we have researchers in Europe, researchers who look at Egypt, Turkey, and other rising developing countries with their own military industrial complexes that are engaging in these sort of cross regional and sort of regional production. The second research track that was covered was really the multipolarity research track, which looks at increasingly great power competition and its impact on the global South, as well as the rising South-South relations. So, there's, as everyone knows, a lot of influence and a lot of discussion about the, great power competition, the rivalry between Russia, China, and the United States. And that's taking center stage in DC, it's taking center stage in the media, on our TV screens, in our newspapers. But part of what the project wants to do is look at the impact of great power competition and multipolarity in third countries, in the global South. How are these increasing rivalries and in some ways indirect confrontations, how are they playing out in Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa and the Middle East, South Asia, and elsewhere? So we had two working groups that reported on that. And then a big part of the second day of the conference was to really report on, by our hubs, by our network partners, on insecurity from a comparative perspective. So Bassam made a presentation which was really illuminating, if I can praise you in person here live, about.
Can you repeat that?
He's not.
I was in awe of your presentation, Bassam, about the flawed thinking that prevailed when thinking about the Syrian conflict and the different ways in which securitization was introduced, how it was understood and misunderstood, how there were partial framings of securitization projects that did not tell us the full picture of what was happening. I don't want to reduce or simplify that talk, but it was exactly the kind of work we're trying to do. And there was a similar presentation from a colleague of ours, Dr. Fernando Brancoli, about Brazil, for example, that talked about the rise of Bolsonaro and Bolsonarismo with its own militaristic securitized projects, as well as its incredible affinity to Israel and its sort of collaboration and militaristic language and sort of mindset and disposition. So it was a chance to hear sort of from the network directly about their own experiences and their own projects. So those were the kind of things that we did in the conference itself. Moving on to some of our next projects or long-term plans. As I've said on the show before, we've recently launched a blog called Global Insecurity, which you can access if you go to our website, where we're really trying to feature shorter pieces, hard-hitting pieces about things in the news cycle that reflect our perspective, that really provide an attempt to deconstruct things related to security and insecurity that are in the news, but from a very critical and alternative perspective that helps us fulfill our mission in redefining the terms of discussion about security. And we have one that's coming out shortly about the Brazilian election that I would hope people can check out. It's going to be published in the next 24 hours. We have our ongoing podcast, but I want to talk one last item, if I can just say, in terms of future plans, about a very important research project that is a more long-term research project, which is a collaboration between Security in Context, the Arab Studies Institute, and the Syrian Center for Policy Research about measuring insecurity. And I think this is going to be an interesting contribution, not just from a thematic perspective, but from a methodological perspective. The Syrian Center for Policy Research has an incredible amount of experience developing new methodologies in the context of conflict, and methodologies that doesn't just look at basically like GDP data, which is a one snapshot. We see a lot of reports that look at snapshots of, the level of poverty or the level of growth. But a lot of these reports don't tell us the dynamics, don't tell us what is it that led to poverty, what is it that led to a certain outcome. Our approach, in collaboration with ASI and SCPR, is going to be to develop a new approach about measuring insecurity that looks at how can we actually understand the context, the dynamics, as well as the outcomes. And this is going to be through developing new white papers and research papers on insecurity, developing indices and conceptual frameworks, and ultimately developing surveys that are appropriate and are focused, that try to get at some of these key issues. So I would really urge everyone to sort of stay tuned on our website. We're going to be rolling out some of those in the next weeks and months. And in every year, we hope to produce what will be a sort of an annual report on this, the outcomes of this project.
Thank you, Omar. And one quick thing before we go, because we have a busy lineup today. I'm going to show very quickly the not the entire video, but the actual picture of it online. This is the Security in Context preview for what Security in Context is, and it's actually quite remarkable. We're going to include a link for this in the digest, and have people check it out, because it's really creative. The voiceover actually sums up what Security in Context is about, and it's visually stunning. So I would like to add this to the digest, and perhaps we'll even close with it if possible. So yeah, thank you, Omar, for everything, and I really look forward to continuing to work on this project with everyone, and we'll see you again.
It's always
I'm sure.
good to see you.
Yeah, always
Thank
good
you
to
so
see
much.
you. Salam
I
alaikum. Did you
appreciate
get
it.
the song I sent you this morning?
I did. I appreciate it. It's very
Sadani
nice.
by Nabil Shail from the late 1980s. Okay. Salam
Beautiful.
alaikum.
Okay, well, moving on. Last week, Jadalia's Iran page held an event titled In Her Name, which was a conversation with scholars of Iran and its diasporas to discuss the current anti-government protests there. The speakers contextualized the protests within the broader struggle for women's rights in Iran and transnational feminist movements.
The event was co-moderated by myself and Professor of Anthropology at William & Mary, Nigar Razavi. The discussion was incisive as it was timely, and gave proper context to the protests that are mostly missing from mainstream discourse.
We are excited to bring on Manihe Moradai.
JJ. It's
I'm so sorry.
She's not Mexican.
I'm so sorry. So sorry. Manisha and Catherine to share some of the insights from the event, which, if I can say so myself, just from an audience perspective, it was truly an incredible and powerful and moving event that I highly recommend for anyone who wants to know.
And we're still getting a lot of comments about the event, either that describing how productive it was for folks that watched it, or where they can watch it again or assign it or basically access it. So it will be coming out this week, in full video on Status Hour and Jadaliya. And we hope that we'll have you guys again. But for now, what can you tell us a little bit? Well, welcome Manije and Catherine, first of all.
Thank you. It's great to see you both. Great to be here.
Yes, thank you. So great to see you all.
Thanks for coming on somewhat short notice because we did have the event only last week. Can you tell us a little bit about these protests and what they tell us about the context of feminist organizing under the Iranian regime?
Go ahead, Manijay.
Sure. Well, these protests, in fact, one of the main questions that our event took up last week was what makes these protests qualitatively different from some of the protests, even very large-scale protests that we've seen in the past. And that really is that these protests were sparked, of course, by the death in custody of a young Kurdish woman, Mahsa Jina Amini, who was basically detained, harassed, and then beaten to death by the so-called guidance police or morality police, depending on how you want to call it. And this was, of course, the spark that just unleashed just a massive pressure that has been building up in the society. And what we discussed on Wednesday is that what's really fundamentally different about these protests is that the state imposition of hijab is a pillar of the Islamic Republic. It's not a side issue. And in the past, many of the uprisings that we've seen have been focused on issues of democracy, the right to vote, issues of economic deprivation, and things like that, that haven't necessarily gone after one of the foundational ideologies and forms of control that the Islamic Republic relies on. And so there's this recognition now among wide swaths of the population, far beyond the folks who would call themselves feminist or even necessarily use that word, although there are plenty of people in Iran who do use that word and very much identify with that word. But it's very vast now, the recognition that the state control over women's bodies is at the core of a broader authoritarian structure. Catherine, do you want to jump in?
I would just add that, the break also is in the kind of feeling and exhaustion over particularly the last 4 or 5 years that, the reform strategies of the 90s and the 2000s and, into the last decade, while they've made substantial inroads, they've been effective in many ways, mostly in bringing the issue of sort of feminism and women's rights to the broader society. They're sort of at a dead end, and so the kind of unwillingness of people to keep struggling along this path, but to actually do something far more radical, which is to say that the whole system needs to change. That's also a kind of key departure from previous periods.
Thank you.
The only thing, if I can add,
Absolutely.
is that because the person who was killed, whose death sparked this uprising, is Kurdish. This is extremely significant because there has been, a 43-year campaign by the central government against the Kurdish people, and the protests actually began in the Kurdish region of Iran and then spread. So there's also a kind of newfound unity and connection that people are making between the systemic oppression of ethnic and religious minorities and the systemic oppression of women. And so this is also really historic and powerful.
Absolutely. Now, as I can imagine is no great surprise, Western media is largely focusing on and making this an issue of hijab, focusing solely on the issue of veiling within Iran and in the greater context of the region. I'm wondering what you might be seeing in terms of transnational activism that might be most effective. I know that there was a day of action yesterday, if I am correct. Just what are some of the things that, in your opinions, are being done well?
I mean, I think there's a lot of good news right now. First, while some media has focused very narrowly, I think that there has been a kind of penetration of a transnational feminist analysis even into some of the mainstream media sources. So I think it's mixed, but the day of action yesterday was a whole weekend of action, but the day of action yesterday was a specific call from Iranian feminists to stand in solidarity with them and with the people of Iran. And I think many of us went to actions, and the kind of demands at the actions were about, we're very clearly, explicitly feminist and informed by a kind of transnational feminist political and intellectual tradition that has been very alive in the last decades, and is sort of being renewed here in a certain sense. So many feminists from South Asia, from Sudan, from Afghanistan, have sent solidarity statements to the protests, and I think Jadali is going to post some of those at some point. But I've been having conversations with some feminists in India who saw our conversation and who just immediately felt a kind of connection to the issues we were raising, that you can, that the connections between the sort of regulation of women's bodies and patriarchal authoritarianism is, a set of issues around which many people in many places can organize and connect to, and that this is not about, a particular, Muslim government. It's also about a Hindu nationalist government. It's also about a secular Christian government. It's about the sort of construction of patriarchal states and the ways in which they secure their kinds of understandings of citizenship along axes of gender and also race and class. And so I think these are the kinds of conversations that are unfolding, and they connect up with just a kind of widespread global dissent against this kind of state violence, this kind of patriarchal authoritarianism and conception of national belonging. And there's a real desire to resist this, to come up with another way of organizing our lives that is, happening in Iran and is happening in many places. But I have heard a lot from people who say they're inspired by the conversation to think in these nuanced ways and to think deeply about what is it that we're trying to build here, and how is that an international, transnational project?
Yeah, and I think being here in the United States, where we've of course seen decades of Islamophobia, war and occupation of Muslim countries, it's been really important in terms of building transnational feminist solidarity, as Catherine was discussing, for those of us located here, to be very clear that the movement in Iran is targeting compulsory hijab. It's targeting a pillar of state ideology and violence and violent control, over women's bodies. This is not about a universal hijab. There is no such thing, of course. And so what we've tried to say on some of these protests is, the same way that we have to support the right of women in Iran to control their own bodies and not wear hijab if they don't want to, we have to support the right of, women in the West to wear hijab and have that control over their own bodies against the kind of Islamophobic, stigmatization and sexism against Muslim women in these parts of the world. So we have to be able to combine these and see them as, a principle that women can decide for themselves, must decide, their own future, their own fate, how they move through the world, have complete control over their bodies. And as Catherine said, that resonates deeply, I think, with women all over the world.
Well, thank you both so much for being here with us.
I think when you said absolutely, you were muted. So it.
Absolutely.
Yes, okay.
Thank you both so much for being here with us today and for the incredible discussion that you were both participants in. I, again, highly, highly, highly encourage any and all audience members to check out that discussion.
No, absolutely. And I was really honored to be a part of it. And I am definitely going to assign that conversation when we are addressing Iran this semester, actually, at some point. So, and we would love to speak with you both again. Of course, Manije is one of the co-editors of the Iran page on Jadaliya, and we will definitely be in touch a lot more. And perhaps we can lure Catherine into our Iran Project Network, because that's what we do. And I just want to say something that's a little off, and that is, yeah, I know it's very strange. I'm saying something off topic. So
Doesn't sound like you.
I don't know if it's appropriate in this day and age to make that comment, but both of your voices are awesome and super calming. I would love to actually get in touch with you for voiceover work. That we need actually somebody with
There's
a
always
voice
something
not like
else
this.
here. Always a new project on the horizon.
Truly honored, Bassam. Thank you.
Absolutely. That's a very high compliment.
Thank you so much, and we hope to see you soon, hopefully under better circumstances.
Yes. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having us.
Bye.
Salam.
Bye-bye.
Wonderful. Well, we have another great book coming out by a beloved ASI team member, Lisa Hajar, who is a Jadaliya co-editor and professor of sociology at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Lisa's new book from the University of California Press, titled The War in Court: Inside the Long Fight Against Torture, traces the fight against U.S. torture policy by lawyers who brought the war on terror into the courts.
This book outlines why challenges to the policy of torture had to be waged on the legal terrain, and why hundreds of lawyers joined the fight and were able to force the government to change the way prisoners were treated, and focused attention on state crimes perpetrated in the shadows.
And in just a moment, we'll have Lisa on the show to tell us more. Welcome, Lisa. I have to tell you, I have been looking forward to this book for so long, probably since the first time I met you and I heard that it was in the works. I was so excited about it. So top of my reading list, and welcome.
Yes, welcome,
Thank you.
Lisa, and welcome, Lisa, and it's really great to see you again. I haven't seen you for quite a while, and there seems to be is that God behind you with the light? Or
I don't have a good set like you. It's just my living
no, it's
room.
actually really inspiring. Yeah. Gifek, how are you?
Good. Thank you so much, MK and Bassam, for having me.
Of course, of course. We are so excited about this text and looking forward to hearing more about it. So we were wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what motivated you to delve so deeply into the topic of the fight against torture in the U.S.
Now and before.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, what I often jokingly say is that I was doing torture before it was cool. Like, I became interested, in torture, when I was a graduate student doing research on the Israeli military court system in the West Bank and Gaza, which was the subject of my first book. And I learned that torture makes the Israeli occupation go around, or at least it did, in that period when I was working on it. And when 9/11 happened, some of the things that Bush, but particularly Vice President Dick Cheney, said in the days after 9/11 made me realize that the United States was going to follow the same torture trail that Israel had done, which indeed it did, and often emulating Israeli government efforts to kind of legalize torture. And so from the beginning, I was, really following what was happening. And the first fight, against what was still utterly a secret policy and program was waged by the late, great Michael Ratner, who was the president of the Center for Constitutional Rights, and a couple of death penalty lawyers, Joe Margulis and Clive Stafford Smith, when they decided very early on, Guantanamo was opened in January 2002, and in February 2002, they brought a lawsuit against President Bush for secret detention at Guantanamo. And so that was sort of the fight. I mean, they didn't even know that torture was going on because everyone at Guantanamo was held incommunicado. But as things went on, just really what happened was that case, Rasul v. Bush, predictably lost in the lower courts, But then in 2004, and I would just say like three events happened in 2004 that completely shifted things in terms of, sort of breaking out into this real fight against torture. One was the Abu Ghraib scandal, which was a result of torture by U.S. soldiers of Iraqi prisoners in the Abu Ghraib prison. That was April 28, 2004. That led to pressure on the Bush administration to provide Congress with information, which resulted in June of 2004 in the release or leaking of some official memos, which were instantly referred to as the torture memos, which revealed what I had suspected, was that torture was authorized from the top. And then several weeks later, the CCR, Center for Constitutional Rights, won. They beat the Bush administration in the Supreme Court. And it was that confluence of events, like the US government was torturing people, that government lawyers and officials had authorized it, that galvanized lawyers to really start volunteering to represent Guantanamo detainees and so on. And so it was really this kind of sort of momentum that goes on. But part of what the book talks about is, I really kind of trace everything, over a 20-year period, in the sense that the way I would, my elevator bullet point about what the book is, it's the anti-torture history of the war on terror. And so I also look at the role and the collaborations of military lawyers who were assigned to defend Guantanamo detainees who were put on trial. And just one thing that really comes out, and which I try to talk about or really tell the story of, is the way that so many American lawyers who'd never even thought about torture before, had no experience with torture, were kind of learning on the job, and the impact that realizing that the U.S. government was torturing people as a policy and not, and really horrific forms of torture had very profound effects on people's own personal and professional, lives and identities. And so that's part of the story that I tell in this book.
Wonderful. Thank you for that recap. It certainly has us all very excited. I've used that word so many times today to explain this text, but excited. But
and MK was like, couldn't stop telling me as you were talking, I want to read this book. I want to read this book. So
can I say one thing? So this book is, as an academic, we write boring academic articles with footnotes.
Thank you.
But this book is a trade book. I wanted to tell this story, and make the fight against torture interesting and accessible to a broader readership. So it's a trade book. So I think that people will hopefully find it, kind of something like a page turner.
And a lot of people, by the way, a lot of academics are moving to the trade book approach because of various reasons, including, and I don't know why it took like 50 years,
at least 50 years.
At least 50 years, including the fact that the circulation of trade books from trade publishers is much broader, and it ends up actually having an effect not just on one's own tenure and promotion and so on, but also on the public, and that's why people are turning towards that. So I'm glad that you did that, and especially you, because you're a full professor. You don't care.
World is your oyster.
My next book is going to be about. Spoiler alert, Kissinger.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
Ready.
It's going to be a murder mystery.
Well, you know what, Lisa? I've been hearing you talk about Kissinger for the past, since I've known you, maybe 20 years. So we're looking forward to that. And we thank you so much for joining us. And I look forward to seeing you again in your neck of the country. Neck of the country?
Okay,
neck of the woods.
Say one thing?
I know, but I don't want to say neck of the woods.
That's okay. Yes,
yeah.
Lisa.
No,
please go.
hang on. Lisa, can we finish this, please? Me and...
The day Kissinger dies, look on Jedaliah, because the obituary I wrote in 2016 and Just Waiting is called Henry and Me. Will be
Oh, you think he's going to die before us?
Might be immortal. I don't know. But
Yeah, thanks for having me, guys.
That is actually my first memory of Lisa. We're in... Hello? Okay. My first memory of Lisa is we were in a meeting and she mentioned something about how she had the Kissinger obituary ready, and then I went into the Jadalia editing software and I looked, found it. It was ready.
See you soon, Lisa Habibti. Salam.
Okay, now we will give you a brief interlude.
Oh, which one do you want to go with?
Let's promote status.
Okay, let's do it.
Why not?
All right. That was kind of cool.
All right. Now, Bassem, I know that you had an exciting conversation with our next guest, who I will now introduce, Abdallah Al-Aryan. We have had a few books, actually, as is evident with our conversation with Lisa, from ASI team members, including co-editor of Jadaliya's Critical Currents in Islam page, Abdallah Al-Aryan, who published his book from Hearst Publishers titled Football in the Middle East, State, Society, and the Beautiful Game. Last week, ASI co-sponsored a lecture where Abdallah addresses some of the questions found in the book.
This book examines the complex questions raised by the phenomenon of football as a significant cultural force in the Middle East, as well as its linkages to broader political and socioeconomic processes. It also introduces original research questions that... Sorry, that was not the right intonation. It also introduces original research questions that promise to open new directions for the study of football in the Middle East. And I actually did enjoy thoroughly speaking with Abdallah, and I got lots of great comments about how this was a refreshing discussion about something that is both cultural and political and so important, not just to the Middle East and the Arab world, but also globally, not least because the World Cup is... I'm actually speaking as if I'm reading something, but this is all ad-lib. I'm impressed.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I sent this conversation to any one of my friends who I know is going to the World Cup. I was like, hello, must watch.
That was my next comment, especially not least because the World Cup is coming up. Bennett, are you okay? You're looking at me as if I did something weird. No. I'm good, okay.
It's because you're short. You can only see half of his face.
I can't see Bennett.
It's fine. It's fine. Anyway, without further ado, we have Abdallah Al-Aryan all the way from Doha. I like that this is written as if he flew in, that he is here right now, all the way from Doha. We have Abdallah Al-Aryan to answer a couple of questions. Welcome, Abdallah.
Marhaba, Abdallah. How are you?
Good to be with you both.
Yeah, very excited to have you on. Abdallah is also, to introduce him also as the main editor of the Critical Currents in Islam page on Jadaliya. He is also an official guest host on the now in hibernation and hiatus a project which we started with, which is a video project titled The Nerdiest Show on the Internet, which is a glorified books received list. And joining us next is Nadia, who's the main co-host along with me, who started this show about 6 years ago. And we will actually be reviving it. So welcome, Abdallah.
I should say that some of our students here have actually dug up those videos.
I heard from you and from Nadia. Yeah. And apparently people binge watch these episodes because as much as people might think that this is kind of like casual and we kind of just go with it because academia is so, uptight. So we try to compensate. That other show is a total comedy.
Amazing. Anyways, back to the topic at hand. Abdullah, what?
Okay, maybe I overdid it.
Maybe. Abdullah, what does your book tell us about the current moment in the Middle East, and how does football fit into that?
Yeah, so this was such a joy to work on, honestly. I mean, for those of us, Bassam obviously, is a massive football fan. We have our WhatsApp group, the Real Football Group, where we sit and talk about kind of every element of the game, the weekly match days. So I think, for those of us who think about this kind of a little bit beyond, just the kind of, the sort of fan perspective, this was a project whereby we approached it as, knowing that the World Cup is coming to Qatar, that the light is shining on, or the spotlight at least is on Qatar these days, given the World Cup, this biggest event in the sport, is coming to the country, and we at the Center for International Regional Studies, which is a kind of an in-house sort of like think tank within Georgetown in Qatar, brought together a collection of scholars to discuss different research avenues, and this is sort of across the region, across the disciplines, thinking broadly about kind of the intersections of the game with various aspects of the society, culture, politics, economics. And I think we produced this volume in part to offer a little bit of context, especially for those people who have a lot of questions about not just the World Cup being hosted in an Arab country for the very first time, being in the Middle East for the very first time, but thinking much more deeply about the history of the game in the region and the way that it actually intersects with so many different other elements of Arab, Middle Eastern, Turkish, Iranian. So there's been a number of different scholars who've kind of emerged, and um, can are we frozen? Sorry, you just froze there for a minute. Oh, and now you're muted.
So basically, it froze for a second, but now you're fine. It could be
Okay.
something on your end or our end. We are not certain.
Okay. Well, yeah, I mean, I'll just go with a very quick description. The book basically is made up of 12 chapters that cover different elements. There's an attempt to try to offer some historical perspective. So there's a chapter, for instance, that goes into the foundations of the Egyptian Football League and the way that that intersects with the struggle against colonialism and the emergence of Egyptian nationalism, and even kind of the point of intersection as far as what constitutes the nation in Egypt, at a point where Egyptian politics tends to overlap with a lot of the competition over things like the various teams and the actual creation of the league. There's a number of chapters that look at kind of the state instrumentalization of football, and on the flip side, looking at how different social movements have also found through football a form of empowerment. So thinking about the Hirak movement, for instance, in Algeria over the last few years, that relied very heavily on fan organization, but also things like art displays from football matches, songs and chants, so forth. There are chapters that look at kind of some of the broader social implications. So things having to do, for instance, I mean, given what we just heard about what's happening in Iran, looking at the denial of entry of female fans into Iranian football stadiums, something that's been a long-term struggle that's only recently reached the point where Iranian women have been finally given the opportunity, although it hasn't come without a major cost. It continues to face certain hurdles, as we can see. There's also a chapter that looks at the trivialization of women's football in the Turkish context. There are chapters that look at the experience of Palestinian football players within Lebanon, where, of course, they're refugees and subject to a number of constraints. There's a chapter that looks at the BDS movement and the question of football and the way that football has been a site of mobilization around justice for Palestine. There are a number of other chapters that kind of look more generally at the question of football in the Gulf, specifically given what we're seeing with the World Cup, the question of migrant labor rights, and the question even of kind of the emerging fan culture, and even the media landscape, looking at things like the role of networks like beIN Sports and the way that they're monopolizing in many kind of media markets the broadcasting rights for how people even experience and watch the game across not just the Middle East, but even beyond. So the book, I think, does a good job of trying to kind of cover as many different elements of these questions as possible, but also showing the fact that this is not just about the region, but really kind of a side of a broader set of global phenomena.
Thank you, Abdullah. We have one additional question for you, and that is we'd love to hear your take. Let me make sure we're good here. We'd love to hear your take on what the book tells us about what's going on in the region today, and how maybe football fits in that context, if at all.
That is the question I
Yeah,
just
I mean,
asked
Yeah.
to get us here before, so I don't want to force Abdullah to
So
answer it
I was
all over
fixing
again.
I was fixing the camera. I apologize that this was actually somehow it got live and it wasn't
It's no
supposed to be
problem.
live.
It's no problem.
Apologies.
But we do have another question for you.
Yes, we do.
Which is, obviously you have shared with us all of the different aspects and areas of research that are featured in this book, and it covers huge amounts of disciplinary and thematic topics. But I'm curious if you could tell us, in the process of working on this book, was it made apparent to you anything that's really lacking in the study of football?
That's a very good
Yeah, I
question.
mean, I think in a lot of ways, this is very much a budding field. I mean, there has been some really important contributions, I would say, especially over the last kind of 2 decades or so. Certainly now, I think there is much more of a shift for obvious reasons toward the role of the Gulf and Gulf states in particular, and oil wealth in particular, in terms of the way that it's showcasing itself, not just within Middle Eastern football, but becoming either a host for mega events, as we're seeing with the World Cup, or with a number of other kind of regional tournaments, the Italian Super Cup, the Spanish Super Cup. All of those were hosted by Saudi Arabia in the last couple of years. But even thinking kind of beyond that, as far as the kind of the political economy of team ownership and even kind of corporate sponsorship. So thinking about kind of the role of Qatar Airways or Emirates or Etihad Airlines, and the way that they're kind of playing a massive role in sponsorship of particular European clubs. And then beyond that, of course, the ownership projects of teams like Paris Saint-Germain or Manchester City, or more recently Newcastle United. And I think there's a really interesting set of questions there, as far as whether this. I think a lot of people would suggest that it constitutes sports washing, but I think beyond just the question of whether this is just an attempt to rehabilitate the Saudi regime, given kind of some of its more notorious recent policies and actions, but to what extent is this going further, not just in terms of cleansing the image, but really thinking about kind of making inroads in policy avenues. I think we've seen that with kind of the UAE government, for instance, in its role in lobbying the British government over the last kind of decade or so, in the way that Manchester City's board members and other kind of personnel within the team have played kind of a crucial role in some of those discussions, according to a lot of the reporting that we've seen. So a lot of this right now exists very much kind of in the realm of investigative reporting and journalism, but I think deserves a little bit more of attentive scholarly research and attention, hopefully going forward.
Thank you, Abdullah, so much for this. And I assure you that we will be expanding our coverage of political, cultural matters, including things on football, not least during the actual World Cup. So we hope that you will be able to join us again. I understand that there is a wave of writing on football recently, including in the United States, which is very refreshing, that we can benefit from by bringing people together to address the matter from different perspectives. We will now, and we would love again to have you join us. We will now actually bring in Nadia while you're on, because you are both in the same city.
All the way from Doha.
All the way from
Both
Doha.
Hi, Nadia.
Hi, Nadia.
Long time no see, guys.
Talk amongst yourselves.
Abdullah, nice plants. I see them in the
Oh,
background.
thank you. Yeah.
It's not that nice.
Well, there's a story behind it, but we're not
Oh,
going
I
to
see.
talk.
I see. I
We're
mean,
not,
it's nice.
we're not in on the joke because we don't live in Doha.
We're not
Yeah,
in
we
on
don't
the
live in
joke.
So-
Doha. We're not cool. We're not cool.
Consequence
What happens
of
when you bring
distance.
us both in- This is what happens when you bring us both on the air at the same time after a long day.
That's
We
right.
talk about
Yes.
plants.
Yeah,
We have no idea what they mean.
So you are both at Georgetown, and we're also have a huge connection here because MK just graduated from the Masters in Arab Studies at Georgetown University. I'm a graduate from the 18th century from Georgetown's same program, and so is Nadia. So this is really interesting.
And I met Abdullah for the first time when I was a student at Georgetown, Qatar.
There we go. So we have a great connection. So yes, Abdullah, unfortunately, we're going to have to let you go to speak with Nadia about Maya Mikdashi's fantastic book, Sextarianism. But you are welcome to hang in there in the green room, so to speak.
I will definitely be watching.
Yes, and we will see you soon, Habibi.
Good to see you.
Take care. Good to see you both.
Take care.
And Nadia too.
Okay, and as Bassam mentioned, we have one more book from an ASI team member to share with you. Maya Mikdashi, who is a co-founding editor at Jadaliyya and associate professor at Rutgers University, recently published her first book, Sextarianism, Sovereignty, Secularism, and the State in Lebanon from Stanford University Press. A couple of days ago, Bassam co-moderated an event with Maya where she discussed how her book theorizes the relationship between sexual difference and political difference, the religious and the secular, the law and bureaucracy, and biopower. The book demonstrates how political difference is entangled with religious, secular, and sexual difference and offers a new way to understand state power. Unfortunately, Maya wasn't able to join us today. However, we are very lucky to have with us today visiting assistant professor at Georgetown University, Qatar, Nadia Sabaiti, who is a co-founding editor at Jadaliyya as well, and who co-moderated Maya's event with Bassam to answer a few questions. Welcome, Nadia.
Hi, Nadia.
Hi, good to see you guys.
Good to see you too. Can you share with us a few insights from your conversation with Maya?
Yeah, so I mean, Bassam and I think, had a really rich conversation with Maya about her incredible and long-awaited a book on sectarianism, where she basically sort of uses this concept to talk about the various entanglements between the religious, the secular, and sexual difference, using Lebanon as a sort of a case study, as a way to sort of theorize out of that. And one of the things I said during the conversation was that sectarianism is both like this very deeply intimate and personal book, not just because of Maya's own background, but with the ways in which the legal cases that form part of both the archival and the ethnographic research that she brings together. So she brings together these kind of multiple methodologies in this incredibly generative way. So these cases are about people's personal lives, right? Which she then treats with a lot of sensitivity in order to get at some of the larger, more complicated, more violent ways in which the Lebanese state has both been created and defined through these cases, but also then,
Can you please look? I
informed
need
the
that
way that
from you
these
because we're
cases
just like, yeah, feel free.
are discussed.
Can you look over there?
So it's a very personal book, but it's also this very politically capacious work, right? It's a study of Lebanon, but it also offers a way to think more broadly, right? So it's also offers a way to think transnationally or through a transnational framework, right, for understanding the connections between sovereignty, sexual difference, secularism, religious pluralism, law and the courts, and of course thinking about the state. So yeah, there's a lot we can say. That's kind of the tip of the iceberg, but I think some of her main interventions and contributions were, thinking about how she understands, state and sovereignty, thinking about the ways in which she brings the archival and the ethnographic together to produce this incredibly rich, textured, methodologically sophisticated text, thinking about the ways in which her keen sense of observation of not just, for example, some of the secular activists that she talks about in a chapter, but also the archivists with whom she works, and just kind of, different members of the public, the really kind of sensitive, rich way in which she talks about it, I think is one of the, for me, one of the key contributions that this work makes. Sorry, guys, it's been a long day. It's 9:00 at night. I've been teaching all day. I'm trying to put sentences together.
No worries. We know that it's actually, what is it? Beyond more than, is it 10 p.m.?
No, it's 9.
It's 9. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's only 2:00 here, and you are putting your sentences together better than Bassam and I are. So.
Yes, absolutely. And I even doubled on a question while I was fixing the camera. I missed it. I feel so bad about this, actually.
It's okay.
All right. So, Nadia, can you let us know a little bit more about the significance of Maya's, like if you can expand on the significance of her many arguments, multi-layered arguments in the book. How does it challenge the dominant discourse on state power in the region? And what is it that you took away from it? Say, for instance, as you and I discussed privately and even during the show, this is a fantastic book to take chapters from or sections and assign in the classroom. What would be the takeaway, and what do you think is the reason you would do that?
I mean, I think, again, there's so many things, but I think for me, one of the most significant takeaways from her book, and the reason why, me and others have called it, kind of path breaking, is that she's doing several things. The first is that she is really positing an understanding of how, or positing this theory of how you cannot understand state power without also understanding the gendered and sexual elements of it. And conversely, you cannot understand the sort of formulations of gendered identity and sexual identity without also understanding how conceptions of state power also inform it, right? So this is where that sort of entanglement between political difference and sexual difference really comes in. And so, if our fields were a little bit perhaps different, right, there would be a way in which this book would be essential reading in a gender course and also in a political science course, right? Apart from a history course, because she looks at archives, right, and theorizes archives and the creation of legal archives in a very sophisticated way, and also in anthropology courses because of the way in which she kind of marries, her ethnographic work, which is the sort of key methodological aspect for anthropology, with the archival. So there's all sorts of ways in which her book really stands at the sort of center of, if we really want to think interdisciplinarily, right? I think her book is an excellent example of how this can be done, in terms of methods, in terms of sources, in terms of the theories that emerge from it. And so in that sense, it's, I think we need to start looking to texts like Maya's as a way forward to get out of, the sort of confines that a lot of our disciplines kind of box us into. And the last thing I would say about our conversation, which I thought was incredibly important and valuable, and which doesn't really get discussed that all too often, is the way in which, those of us who are writing about, place, really, unfortunately, any place in the Middle East, but not just in the Middle East, right, are oftentimes writing in the midst of, in the wake of wars, displacement, massacres, unfortunately, apart from the sort of headier aspects of, uprising revolution, and the impact that has on how we write and how we think, and also the ways in which it forces us to question the purpose of thinking, writing, and publishing about this, when things oftentimes seem so dire that it can be a struggle to sort of, to see our way forward. And so I think it's important to have that conversation because, we don't write in vacuums, right?
Absolutely.
So.
Thank you, Nadia. Thank you very much for this. And we will definitely be having actually a panel of scholars who will be discussing Maya's book sometime in the spring, and we will update you on that. And thanks, Nadia, for always being a sport and joining us when we need to speak with you. And we will revive the Nerdies show on the internet, except that you won't be next to me here in the studio. You will be probably somewhere else, but we will do it. And I'm sure that you also have heard from folks. Actually, you told me about stories that people have seen episodes of it. So that's all very exciting.
Looking forward to it.
Good to see you.
Likewise.
Thanks, Nadia. Assalamu alaikum.
Bye.
And now, ladies and I'm just very excited. I need to take an enunciation course.
No, you're perfect just the way you are.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, which is apparently something that we're not supposed to say anymore, a friend of mine got in trouble in the classroom for saying this ironically, and I'm saying it ironically. And now, everyone, we are going to take a quick look at a quick promo for the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative.
All right, it is
All
now.
right.
It is now time to talk about pedagogy and pedagogical content. The Middle East Studies Pedagogy Team, or the MESPI team, has published a new installment of the Engaging Books series. For those that don't already know, Engaging Books is a monthly series featuring new and forthcoming books in Middle East studies from publishers around the globe. Each installment highlights a trending topic in the MENA publishing world and includes excerpts from the selected volumes. This month's installments involve a selection from the University of Texas Press on the theme of emerging voices in the Middle East. It discusses 5 books from up-and-coming writers in the region, including novels, poetry, anthologies, short fiction collections, and historical fiction. Please be sure to check it out in the digest. And speaking of textual content, we are very excited to soon be celebrating the 30th anniversary of the Arab Studies Journal, which is the founding organization upon which the Arab Studies Institute was born. So in a way, 30 years of ASI, not just ASJ.
Absolutely. And we have an applause thing here. Did it come up? Oh, awesome. Hamad, is it up? People hear the okay. So basically, I'm not gonna read the script. Yeah. Basically, in 1992, a small group of us at Georgetown University started the Arab Studies Journal, and in parallel, of course, the Arab Studies Institute. And this fall actually marks the 30th year that we are operating, producing knowledge at various levels in text, audio, video forms, and holding events, and trying to increase the footprint of critical Middle East studies globally, not just in the United States, but also in Europe and the Middle East primarily, but also beyond. And we couldn't have done this without our approach from the very beginning, which was based on solidarity, much more so than any sort of market principles or values or anything that had to do with material matters. Second, on volunteerism, we actually operated for 20 years without any kind of funding from anyone. We actually funded ourselves whatever projects we were working on, including the Arab Studies Journal, a peer-reviewed journal, the audio and audio-visual collective titled Quilting Point that produced documentaries on a global scale. Third, FAMA, which is the research arm of ASI, Forum on Arab and Middle East Affairs, Arab and Muslim Affairs. And then finally, Jadariya in 2010, before we received our funding, some support from the Social Science Research Council and Open Society, and then other sources, sort of sequentially after that. But we couldn't have done it without the work and labor of hundreds of people for the first 20 years before we actually published Jadariya or created Jadariya, which ended up sort of catapulting the entire organization into like a different order of magnitude in terms of public exposure. And the Arab uprisings actually became an opportunity for us to feature our work, scholars, writers, journalists, artists, activists on our pages, which actually became a go-to place. At the time, there were only a few individuals that were producing knowledge on the Middle East online, and then the more collective approach was actually handled by more mainstream, sort of not necessarily always corporate, but more mainstream outfits and organizations, with few exceptions, like for instance Democracy Now! So we were very excited to have actually made that foray into a much broader mass a much broader reception by a much broader public, and that allowed us to continue publishing and working. And then we finally established Tadween Publishing, which is the fifth and last institution or organization under the rubric of the Arab Studies Institute. So we're very excited this year to be in this position, alive and kicking. And we're probably going to have a reception at the Middle East Studies Association conference in Denver this fall. And we will keep you posted on that. Mohammed, I didn't read anything in the script.
I wasn't planning on you.
Did I? Okay, if I missed something, let me know.
Wonderful. So this is all just by way.
Sorry?
Play the promo.
Play the promo. Okay.
This is all just by way of announcement to say that we will be continuing to celebrate ASJ and ASI in the coming weeks and months.
Absolutely. And actually, there are quite a few matters that we will be sharing with you regarding the starting point of the Arab Studies Institute, particularly celebrating the Arab Studies Journal, now co-edited by the fantastic scholars Owen Lawson and Ziad Aboulish, who took over from Shireen Sayali, who basically took the journal to the next level in the 2000s. And prior to that, it was Shireen and Nadia Sbaiti who was with us, who were editing the journal. And prior to that, it was myself who was editing the journal for the first decade. And we continue our mission, and we now have a promo produced by Elena Newsom and Bennett Spear. Is it Spear or Spears?
Just one. Yeah.
Just one spear?
Enough for one man, not an
Assalamu
army.
alaikum. Yeah.
Next, we're going to go over some new texts out now.
Absolutely.
First, we have Ashjan Ajour's Reclaiming Humanity in Palestinian Hunger Strikes, Revolutionary Subjectivity and Decolonizing the Body. The text seeks to articulate the hunger strikers' own philosophy of freedom and the weaponization of their bodies. The book argues that the hunger strikers, in their interaction with the dispossession of the colonial power, invent technologies of the self to challenge and transcend the colonial power.
Eleni Sentim, which is basically here, maybe I should do the... Eleni Sentim Zeleki. Zeleki? Okay. Eleni Sentim Zeleki and Arash Davari, who is a member of the Iran project here at the Arab Studies Institute, recently co-edited a special issue of the journal Comparative Studies of South Asia, Africa, and the Middle East. They also co-wrote the introduction titled Third World Historical Rethinking Revolution from Ethiopia to Iran, where they look at the revolutionary history of both countries and attempt to answer the question, how can we imagine a project that is equally anti-colonial and anti-imperialist while enacting a commitment to democracy? These are questions that are truly remarkable, and we will actually be connecting more and more with basically the where are we now? With folks from this project. Not only because it's interesting, but because it also overlaps with our own project so far happening behind closed doors, titled Navigating Anti-Imperialism and Anti-Authoritarianism, which also tries to address the issue of what do you do when a democracy or a protest for democracy are supported by imperial powers. How do you navigate the terrain, which is something that has been happening and is happening right now, and actually has Syria and Iran as critical case studies, which we will be addressing. Now, I will turn to MK.
Now, as always, we will wrap up the show with a couple of must-read recommendations.
Shall we do a quick, just relaxing thing? Yeah. Okay.
Okay, first, in a piece titled Contested Heritage, Paul Bowles and the Making of Music in Morocco, Benjamin Jones problematizes the decades-old ethno-musicological survey by Paul Bowles to save Amazigh folk culture and music. Jones demonstrates how Bowles' attempts were steeped in an Orientalist and exploitative perception of the region and is something that requires redress by institutions such as the Library of Congress.
Jadaliya's Arabic page published another... Oh, we have the wrong... Let's do this. All right. Jadaliya's Arabic page published another installment of the On This Day series, which is a collaboration with the Lebanese As-Safir newspaper. This installment marks 11 years since 9/11 and features articles pulled from As-Safir's archives covering the attacks, their aftermath, and the effects on Arabs and the region.
And that brings us to the end of our show, covering a month of knowledge production in September. Please be sure to check out the episode digest on Jadaliya later this week for links to all the content we covered today.
And we are also very thank you all. So I'm going to ad-lib. Is that okay, Muhammad? All right, thank you. And we will also be addressing bits and pieces of the various organizations, projects, and knowledge production throughout this year. Whether it is the main organizations that I shared, Arab Studies Journal, Jadaliya, and so on and so forth, but also some of the projects that actually have allowed us to make an impact in the field of Middle East studies, including the Knowledge Production Project, the Middle East Studies Pedagogy Initiative, the Political Economy Project, and actually various other projects that we will be addressing in the coming months. So we hope that you will join us to learn more about these projects, learn how to join us and collaborate with us, and perhaps use some of the material and resources that we have produced for just basic learning or for your educational purposes, specifically assigning material to students in classrooms, which is perhaps one of the defining features of the Arab Studies Institute, which is basically that we get our material assigned in classrooms, perhaps at a higher rate than average, let's say. So we are very excited about that. And finally, thank you to all for joining us. We will see you next month for episode 3 of the 3rd season, where we'll be covering the spooky month of October. I just read that. I did not write it. It's Muhammad. Muhammad was, I think, born in America. So I would not use the word spooky. I've never used the word spooky except when I talk to my 8-year-old daughter. But thank you for making me look that I'm cool. Spooky. Okay. Is there anything else, MK, that we... ما في شيء. انت you wanna go home? Oh, okay. Well,
I'm kidding.
No, we all want to go home. All right.
This is your home. You got nowhere to go.
Okay. Assalamu alaikum.